Chapter 5. The most wonderful time of the year. I thought Christmas was magical when I was a kid. I still do, but when I was a kid, oof. There was a plaza near our home with a dingy little grocery store, a men's fine clothing store, appliance store, little shop that sold cards and fancy little knickknacks, barber shop, shoe store, super overheated little branch of the public library. As you would walk around the perimeter of the plaza outdoors between shops, music would be playing through speakers. There was a moment in time, very gray with winter clouds. Great big snowflakes began to fall, and Christmas music was playing. I got such a feeling right in my stomach. This mixture of joy, anticipation, warmth, excitement. This wonderful, happy feeling of magic slowly building and getting ready to arrive. I know I'm lucky to have felt that way. I know a lot of people don't necessarily have nice associations with Christmas or have nice family memories that way. I know that Christmas is a great source of stress for many people. Maybe it brings up pain of lost loved ones or friction with other family members. Maybe it reinforces how lonely people are. Maybe it's a glaring reminder of how poor too many people are. So yes, I know how lucky I am. We were never rich, financially speaking, but we were well off in other ways. And I loved and still love Christmas. Maybe that feeling of excitement would begin simmering when they started playing Christmas music in the stores and on the radio. Maybe it would begin with that first snowfall of the year. We always got a real Christmas tree every year. I could be wrong, but I feel like winters used to be colder. Or maybe those giant station wagons and other very second-hand cars we all drove around in took longer to heat up. At any rate, pick a freezing night of the year, sometime not too long before Christmas. That would be the night we'd all bundle up after dinner, hop into the car, and head out to find the perfect tree. You'd think it would be easy, but you don't know my mother. We'd head to the first tree lot. Dad would have to pull many different trees out from the leaning stacks, hold each one out straight, turn it around a bit for Mom to assess. No, that one's too skinny. That one is too huge. That one has a big ugly bare patch. That one has a crooked trunk. This one is good, but let's go have a look at the next place. Back into the car. Drive on over to the next tree lot. Maybe this time the guy at the lot is the one who is holding out the trees. Once again, too bare, too short. Wait a minute, they're almost all long needle here. Don't they have any short needle trees? Oh, okay, he has a couple, but they cost a fortune. Prices at that lot were way too high, and long needle trees are terrible to try to decorate. The ornaments just slide right off the tree. Off to the third lot. This one is further across town. No, and no. They have short needle trees, but they're all spindly and unappealing. I don't even know how my brother and I really cared about the trees at that point as we stood in a freezing parking lot with subarctic winds howling through, as Mom seriously appraised those trees. Well, clearly that tree at the first lot was the best one. Back into the car, cigarette lit back up, or a new one started, and back to the first lot. Hopefully that first best tree would still be there. If not, there would be a small process of looking again and finally settling on a lesser tree. At that point, we could all get back in the car as they loaded that big tree on top and threaded the rope that Dad brought around to tie it, the car rocking slightly as they hitched and adjusted the rope. Then, back home with a Christmas tree and Mom complaining that all these places are so expensive now, and maybe annoyed that Dad didn't help much to choose it or offer enough of an opinion. But never mind. We had a tree! Hooray! One year we went to a cut-your-own-tree lot. It was absolutely freezing, and I had to wear my egghead hat. It was an itchy, light beige hat with a hole for the face that came down over the neck to double as a hat-scarf combo, and apparently made my head look like an egg. We had to walk far out into the field to find a tree because they had been really picked over. Finally, after we found one, we got a tractor ride back to the main area where you could pay for your tree, and get a styrofoam cup full of the world's hottest soup. I can't tell you what kind of soup it actually was because the first sip burned the shit out of my tongue. So the flavor was basically hot. Hot was the flavor. That soup was the worst I've ever burned my tongue, I do believe. Second only to that molten hot chocolate served up for breakfast at that one and only Girl Guide sleepover I went to. One year the tree fell off the roof of the family car as Dad was driving home, but only my brother remembers that, so we'll just have to leave that there and imagine the swearing after Brother said, "Dad, the tree fell off!" Eventually, the exciting night arrived, putting the tree up. For years when I was young, the tree was set up in the good living room. Imagine that as an elegant sign, written in cursive and capitalized. The good living room. Most people had a good living room years ago. That was the room with the fancy, usually uncomfortable furniture where your parents sat with guests. That was not the room to hang out in on the regular. No. In our house, that was the TV room. I guess people would call that the family room, but in our house, it was the TV room. In that room, the furniture, though homelier, was more comfortable, and the side tables and wooden arms of the couch had dents and dings and pale rings from damp drinking cups. The Christmas tree was a star, and thus deserved the good living room. In the 70s and into the 80s, our living room had an amazing orange, red, green shag carpet, a gold velvet couch, and matching gold chair. The large picture window was topped with a cheap wood or plywood, cornice or valance or whatever it's called, which we set our Christmas cards on top of, and framed on either side with long, heavy, slightly shiny gold curtains over shears. I will always remember the smell of shears, since at some point I, like probably most kids, would twirl myself up in them or hide between the curtain and the shears. The curtains were held back with thick gold rope tie-backs with fancy tassels. I loved those because it was like it was a doll face on the end with beautiful gold Egyptian hair. Well, in my imagination anyway. I could find a toy-like face or likeness in anything once upon a time. So, clearly, that was the appropriate room for the superstar tree. First, the tree had to be secured into the Christmas tree stand. But guess what? That tree that seemed to be nice and straight at the lot usually wasn't all that straight. There had to be a lot of fiddling and finagling with Dad lying on the floor, wrestling the tree slightly this way or that way, adjusting the screws, getting annoyed, having to lean it one way to correct it from wanting to topple over, getting annoyed with Mom who kept insisting it's crooked. "I can't make it straight because it's going to fall over." "That looks terrible. You're going to have to do something. We can't have the tree looking that crooked. That looks stupid. Can't you just lean it forward a little more?" "If I lean it forward any more, it will fall over." Probably at some point they get into a fight. My brother and I are practically dancing with excitement and impatience to just get the damn thing set up. Finally, the tree is in the stand. But now it's time to put on the lights. That also takes forever because they have to be perfectly spaced. The ornament boxes are up from the basement. Dad gets the favorite family Christmas record out, opens up the lid of the enormous record player stereo cabinet, puts the record on, small pops and scratches, and then that familiar song starts playing. Brother and I roll our eyes and act like we're so embarrassed that Dad puts the same corny record on every year, but we love it. Also, we all get to have eggnog, also known as the most incredible, delicious drink of the year. Dad adds a little rum to his and Mom's glasses, and Mom tops their drinks with a little pinch of nutmeg. Dad lets me have the tiniest sip, and I truly don't understand why they want to ruin a perfectly good drink. Their version is disgusting. I love those little ornaments. There are the little accordion fold paper men with their little hats, beaded eyes, and little sticking out noses. Are they elves? Well, they look like little friend men to me. There is the set of satin threaded balls. Some of them are a little worse for wear, and a couple of them are downright frayed and hairy. Of course, Brother or I make sure to put one of those on the tree for laughs. There are the big tinsel garlands, and Mom drapes those around before we start placing ornaments. For whatever reason, good, bad, old, or broken, my mother has saved all the Christmas decorations. Even if they're so decrepit, they're never meant to go on the tree again. We like to sneak out the thin, ratty garland when one of us isn't paying attention and quickly fling it around the other's neck, wrap it around, and make sure to enthusiastically friction it against the skin like the world's itchiest scarf. I particularly enjoy my brother cringing and laughing in agony, as he has always been the most sensitive to clothing, and anything that feels remotely tight, and especially anything he deems to be itchy, which is basically anything that isn't cotton. I really love the set of old-fashioned painted glass ornaments. They are small and very, very delicate. No two are alike, and I think they are just beautiful, but we have to be very, very careful with them. Perhaps the most special of the old-fashioned glass ornaments is the frosty pale, mint green and silver painted ball from Nanny, Dad's mother. It's larger than the little glass set and simpler. Merry Christmas is written in scrolling cursive, and all I know is that Dad says it's old. So there is some real mystique and prestige surrounding that ornament. In fact, it doesn't just get hung out in the open on any old branch. No, it is hung in the safe hollows of the tree, closer to the trunk, where it can't be jostled or touched by any of the other ornaments. And there it sits, quietly, privately, softly illuminated by the colored lights. We also have a tiny Christmas tree, maybe about 20 inches tall, and Mom always decorates that one. Also, it stays in the kitchen. In early years, she decorates it with her own homemade cookie ornaments and popcorn garland. I have a problem with those cookie ornaments. They're cookies, but Mom insists I would not want to eat one. But they're cookies. No, you don't want to eat those, Mom tells me. They're just for decoration. I don't get it. They wouldn't taste good. If you're calling it a cookie, how could it not taste good? They're salty. Salty! Still, I don't really believe it. Little Karen is a firm fan of cookies and has yet to meet a cookie she doesn't like. It seems fairly ridiculous that someone would bake cookies that nobody can eat ever, just for the sake of being able to decorate a tree with them. I can, however, concede that maybe the popcorn garland isn't so tasty. It smells like the basement. As Brother and I decorate the tree, and with Sister a little later when she finally arrives on the scene, Mom stands back, smoking and supervising. She's very focused on the ornaments being placed onto the tree in perfect balance, symmetry, and eye-pleasing distribution of shape and color. You've got too many red ornaments in that section. Try to move some of those around a bit. Or, that section over there could use more ornaments. At some point, she'll notice the hairy satin ball on the tree, finally, and laugh impatiently and say, "Who put that on there? Get that off." The tree is a serious business to Mom, to Brother and I, and especially my pesky brother, not quite so serious. He enjoys putting the worst of the reject ornaments on the tree. Maybe an artful placement of Mom's pack of smokes. She doesn't find this particularly funny. And maybe in later years, one of Sister's hearing aids. He's also responsible for many, many years of the classic "What happened to the TV?" prank. This involves taking a piece of tinsel and, with the help of static electricity, meticulously zigzagging it across the TV screen. Then he calls out, "Something's wrong with the TV!" Mom is immediately perturbed. "What's the matter?" Then she sees the crack in the screen. "Oh my God!" "Ha ha, Mom, it's just tinsel." It's hard to believe just how many times Mom fell for that joke. Why was the TV on? Well, I don't recall Dad putting many ornaments on the tree. He set it up, had the necessary fights with Mom, helped get the lights on, and that big, beautifully garish foil reflector star on the top, had a rum and eggnog with Mom, and then he left to go watch the news or some other dad-type program. Speaking of tinsel, I think they still make it, but it went out of vogue when it was discovered that it really wasn't a nice thing for your pet to eat. I loved tinsel. Was it also called icicles? I think so. To me, it was the final, magical, shimmering fairy touch on the tree, those thin silver strands. And we were frugal, so Mom would meticulously regather them from the tree and put them in a big clump in the ornaments box at the end of each Christmas season. That was another fun thing to fuck around with. If you were the faster kid, you could shove that whole clump of tinsel down the back of your sibling's shirt and obnoxiously and furiously rub it against their back for hilarious, scratchy, itchy fun. Or, if you were brother, you took the whole pile and plopped it onto a single branch. Then just sit back and see how long it takes Mom to notice. I loved the Christmas tree. It was magic. It was like an extra surprise, mystical family member. It smelled good. It had its own glass bottle of sugar water, which Dad mixed together and would feed to it. It drank water. One time, many years later, Brother's girlfriend at that time accidentally poured herself a glass of the Christmas tree water, thinking it was ginger ale, and was too polite to say our ginger ale tasted like shit. She demurely said to Brother that she wasn't thirsty and did he want to finish it? He took one sip and loudly exclaimed she'd been politely drinking the Christmas tree water. Anyway, at nighttime, when the tree was all lit up, I would go into the good living room, stand before the tree, and just drink in the sight of all of it. The sparkle, the colored lights, the beloved little ornaments, the silent bond with the tree itself. Even if it was the best of the worst that we could get that year, even if it had a crooked trunk and many bald patches, once it was all dressed up, it was pure magic. Christmas with my family was always lively, noisy, chaotic. In the early years before my sister was born and when she was still small, we would go to Nanny's first on Christmas Eve, and after that we'd head over to Grandma's for presents. On Christmas Day back then, we'd have dinner at Grandma's. We'd get dressed up on Christmas Eve, pile into the freezing station wagon with its ice-cold vinyl seats, and head on over to Nanny's first. I should say Nanny and Papa, because he was there too, but the woman of the house seems to get most of the credit for the house, or they did once upon a time. I'm not gonna lie, and I'm not proud of it, but Christmas Eve at Nanny's seemed horrendously boring and mildly torturous until we could get that visit out of the way and head to what I thought was the real fun. For one thing, I can only remember getting a Christmas present from my paternal grandparents once. Apparently, this stood out in my mind. Would I care at this point in my life? Absolutely not. In fact, I'd prefer it. Also, to a kid, it was super duper dull. Kids of today truly have no clue what visiting was like back in the day. You'd go with your parents to some relative's or parental friend's house and you'd sit yourself right down there on their weird couch, and you know what you did? You sat there, quietly, while the grown-ups chatted about grown-up things. Maybe they offered you a drink, and then you awkwardly drank that while they kept chatting. Maybe they suddenly and horrifyingly would start talking to you, knocking you out of your own thoughts and daydreams. "So you like school?" Always loud. Yes, it's okay." "What grade you in now?" 2. "What's that?" "Dad, she's in grade 2, aren't you, Shorty?" Beaming at me. If you were lucky, they let you sit in another room and watch TV. If you were lucky, or unlucky, really depends on their kids. There were kids there and you had to, hang out with them and hope that you could go home soon, play until the grown-ups were done chatting. At Nanny and Papa's house, we sat down the basement in their finished living room after dealing with the always horrible dilemma of where I'd put my coat once we arrived. It was dim with very muted lighting and dark decor, dark wood paneling on the walls, dark furniture. The house was already old people warm, and to add to that, a fire would be roaring away in the gas fireplace. So you'd just come in from the freezing car into this subtropical home, sitting all mashed up between your brother and one of your parents while the adults chatted about the most boring things ever, and eventually you would be fighting off sleep and frigging yearning to go to Grandma's house and get to the real fun. I'm not proud of feeling that way, but that was my impression of Nanny and Papa's. I wish I had known my Nanny a lot better. Because I didn't visit her or see her nearly as much as my maternal grandmother, I had a less familiar impression of her. Dad had a tormented relationship with her for many years, and because of that, he often imparted his resentment and frustration-filled stories onto us. And for a very long time, it colored my view of Nanny, and I decided that she was a troubling person because of that. Funny, because Mom also had a very tormented relationship with her own mother, but there came a point in my life when I made a conscious decision to love Grandma anyway, because I very much wanted to have a grandparent I loved no matter what. Nanny was born in England in the early 1900s in a large and very poor family. Dad told me that Nanny would wrap a little block of wood up in wax paper to make it look like she actually had something in her school lunch. When her family emigrated, they actually left some of the kids behind in England, including Nanny, and a few siblings came with their parents to Canada. Nanny and the remainder of her family met up with them later. Wrap your brain around that. Dad came from a big family himself. As I pieced little details of good and disparaging tidbits I'd hear about Nanny together over the years, it sounds to me like she suffered from depression and anxiety. As she got older, and after Papa died when I was 14, she seemed to have a constant pain in her jaw. She endlessly fretted about the temperature of the house and would call all the time for reassurance about the thermostat. Dad would get annoyed. I'd hear him on the phone. "Ma, just leave it! It's fine! Don't touch it!" Then he'd get off the phone and grumble that he was going to hammer a box with a big nail over that thermostat so she couldn't obsess over it anymore. I remember the TV tray set up beside her chair that was filled with pills and medications, and a great big 1980s TV channel changer, nearly as big as an old computer keyboard. The pills thing didn't seem like anything too out of the ordinary because every elderly person back then had an armload of prescriptions. She'd phoned Dad a lot, and we absorbed Dad's frustration, and we thought that Nanny was a pest. I wish I had known Nanny better. I definitely regret that. She was always nice to me. Dad said that at her best, Nanny had a wicked sense of humor, was great at card games, and was admired as one of the fastest grape pickers at the local vineyard back in the day. After Nanny died, in her 90s, Dad started to think differently about his mother. He had a lot of sympathy for her, and a realization that he didn't have the patience for her that she deserved while she was alive. He said that it occurred to him that she suffered from depression. I know that awful grip of depression. I know the suffocating power of anxiety. I know how sore a jaw can become from clenching your teeth so tight together and doing that, even at night, as you sleep your uneasy sleep, without you even realizing. I'll bet this was why her jaw hurt. I bet she wanted medications to just take away the feeling she had inside, and I'll bet that doctors were simply all too willing to give them to her. Maybe she was unhappy for years. Maybe she carried a great deal of unhappiness with her to Canada. Maybe she was smart and lonely as a mother of a big family, with a husband who wasn't a bad person, but according to Dad was never at home. Maybe she yearned all the time for something more. I look back on Nanny with love and so much sympathy and empathy. There was a part of me who realized that I had to tune out my parents' narratives of their own pain and see a person through my own eyes. And that's what I did with Grandma, who certainly had her own faults. Papa was nice enough, kind of crusty, kind of annoyed over most things, and often mildly irked by Nanny, which didn't seem like a big deal. Growing up, I'd say I'd observed that most husbands and wives were annoyed with one another, and some even downright disliking of one another. Papa had a pleasant, mysterious, kind of spicy smell. His soap or aftershave, I'm not sure which. I have no idea why, but as a crazy little kid, I thought of it as his chicken soup smell, even though it didn't smell like chicken soup at all. Sadly, I know even less about Papa. He'd come over sometimes to watch hockey night in Canada with Dad to see the Leafs play. Dad would super crank up the TV volume for the hockey game, which was funny, since whenever Brother and I wanted to turn the TV up a little louder, he'd always tell us, "Exercise your ears," and turn the volume down. So there they'd be watching the Toronto Maple Leafs lose, and Dad would be swearing away, and Papa would be quietly disgusted as he quietly ate the little bowl of ice cream or small piece of pie Mum would give him and savor every bite because he was actually a diabetic. And that was about as far as my relationship with Papa went. A friendly kiss and a hug when he'd arrive and a "Hi, honey," and not much more, which was fine enough to a shy kid. So there were brother and I, and as yet no sister, sitting on Nanny and Papa's couch, slowly melting as all the grown-ups yapped away about the most boring things. Nanny would hold out her roll of antacids and asked if we'd like a mint at some point. We would politely decline. I learned the hard way not to accept a drink at Nanny's. 100% flat pop. And it was that way on purpose because Nanny thought flat pop was better for one's digestion. Shocking if you grew up in a pop-loving, full carbonation era. That first time, I discreetly whispered my horror to brother, and he quietly offered to finish my terrible drink for me. Because that was the thing. If you accepted a drink or a snack during a visit back then at someone's house, and heaven forbid you couldn't choke it back and finish it, your host would most likely be offended or disturbed enough to talk about it. So you either tried your best to gag it down, or maybe you'd be lucky enough to have a really benevolent sibling who would make it disappear for you. Sitting there on the couch, room as hot as an oven, watching the fire, noting the chiming of one of Nanny's many clocks, dying inside. Sending your parents mental pleas to leave, maybe hissing the quietest, "When are we going to go?" to Mom if she was sitting near enough, which she would find really annoying and angrily whisper back, "I don't know." And that's all you'd get. Then finally, the magic moment would arrive, and Dad would announce that, well, we'd better get going. Back into the freezing station wagon, which now felt almost refreshing, and back down to the north end of town to Grandma's house. The home of my Polish grandparents is bright and lively on Christmas Eve. Grandma's house often smells like onions fried in butter. Sometimes it has a sour smell, probably sauerkraut or something similar. One time it had that smell when we came for a visit, and I said quietly to brother, "It smells like nincompoop." No, that is not the definition of nincompoop, which is actually supposed to mean a stupid person, basically an idiot. In my little kid brain, it meant a sour, acidic, slightly brick red, poopish kind of smell. Don't act innocent. You know what I'm talking about. They used to have serve-yourself stations in the grocery store of various olives and pickled veg that you could choose and scoop into plastic containers. Basically antipasto stuff. That zingy pickled smell is pretty much nincompoop to crazy little kid Karen. I can't really explain these things, and why some words develop new meanings all on their own. At any rate, that time I whispered to my brother that Grandma's house smelled like nincompoop, I thought I was being subtle. But suddenly, Grandma had heard and was saying, "What smells? What did it smell like?" I quickly had to backtrack on that one somehow. In younger years, as you entered Grandma's house, invariably the horrifying pet dog was there at the top of the few stairs with his leash affixed to the hook. Fluffy. Fluffy was terrifying. Fluffy was a white poodle mix dog with those rust lines that dogs get around their eyes and beards. And Fluffy would lose his shit and go berserk whenever anyone came over. We're talking fully bared teeth, fierce aggressive barking, and exciting lunging toward you. Needless to say, that was more than just a little scary to try to walk past, even with Grandma saying, "It's okay, honey, he not gonna bite." And then to Fluffy, "Shut up! Such a stupid!" Fluffy also wore his leash permanently in later years because nobody was able to get it off without him trying to rip off their hand. I would be sitting on Grandma's couch and hear Fluffy's chain leash snaking over the floor as he slinked underneath, and there he would lie, growling. Needless to say, we could never pet him. We could, however, throw his ball for him. His ball was the most disgusting ball ever. It was like a ball that had been chewed down over the years to somewhere around golf ball size and was completely saturated with dog spit. I mean, completely. Like, wet. Really, really wet. In order to throw it, you had to hold it as lightly as possible between your thumb and index finger, preferably just between the thumbnail and fingernails, and then you could throw it for him. One time we looked over to find Sister, 3 years old, chewing on Fluffy's ball. I can still picture her squeezing that spongy, gooby ball slowly and methodically with her side molars, and all the adults going apeshit when they saw that happening. Anyways, as I was saying, Christmas Eve at Grandma's was lively. Mom's family were all there, my aunts and uncles, my cousins. Grandma was short and sturdy and slightly round, with pale yellow blonde, dyed, permed hair. Grandpa was tall and slim, quiet, and rolled his own cigarettes. He died when I was 12 or so, and mostly what I remember is that when I came over he'd say, "Hi, princess," which sounded like princess. For that matter, when Grandma said my name, it was Keden. But anyway, there would be music playing, the booze was flowing, and all adult members of Mom's family smoked. The kitchen would be full of cigarette smoke. Brother remembers a blue cloud of it billowing out the open kitchen window. Mom was always very happy when she was with her parents and siblings. A lot happier than when she was with us, I have to say. There would be lots of yummy food to eat. Deli meats and kielbasa, pickles and olives, cheese and crackers, cooked ham, Christmas cookies, those delicious cookies Grandma made, which I always thought were called keefies. We'd all sit in the good living room to open presents. It's worth noting that Grandma and Grandpa had what I thought was the ugliest couch of all time in their good living room. It was yellow and black plaid with a nubbly terry cloth towel kind of fabric, and always felt like it was cold and dank. I thought it was hideous, even for the 70s and 80s. One year, as I sat on the floor in my little corner of the living room opening my presents, it felt like every gift was better than the last. I think that was the year I got the little jewelry box, a Barbie doll, always fantastic, and a bottle of Love's Baby Soft perfume. The jewelry box had a little plastic ballerina with a tiny mesh tutu, and when you wound it up she would twirl to the tinkling sound of "We've Only Just Begun." I thought it was amazing. After being at Grandma's in the 70s and 80s, our parents would often drop us off at home and head over the river to the party one of Dad's sisters who lived in the States was having. This is really sketchy stuff to try to piece together now, and Brother and I have tried because A, did they really leave 9 or 10-year-old brother as the babysitter, or was there actually an older cousin there? And B, when Sister arrived on the scene, did they leave toddler Sister there with 8 or 9-year-old Karen and 13 or 14-year-old brother? At any rate, let's just say driving home never got in most people's way of having a good time back in the 70s and 80s. I'm not justifying this by any means or excusing this at all, but believe me when I tell you that times were very different. Dad was a very careful, competent driver, and let's just try not to think too much about the horror of roads filled with adults driving around half in the bag back then, far more often than they should have. But yeah, my young parents weren't finished partying after Grandma's, and they'd rock on over to Lewiston to party it up over there. And the word was that my aunt poured hookers when she made a cocktail, so, this isn't making anything sound better. Hookers, as far as booze was concerned, was an old expression that indicated a strong drink. If it was Mom's turn to cook Christmas dinner that year, she wasn't too enthused and wouldn't be feeling her best, as you might imagine. One year Dad spent a good portion of Christmas Day in bed and was not very much help. Mom was not impressed. This leads me to the best kid present I ever got. I was 9. I got a dollhouse that was as tall as I was. It was the Cindy house. Cindy was basically Barbie's competition that year. The house was a 3-story luxury apartment with a spiral staircase on the 3rd floor that allowed Cindy to go up to her chic rooftop terrace. The walls and floors were made of cardboard with opulent room details and decor printed on. It had a Cindy-sized battery-powered elevator on the side, on a twine pulley system, and all you'd have to do was flick the switch to either go up or down and glide Cindy to her desired floor. My elevator never worked properly. Why? Well, because that Christmas Eve, Mom and Dad returned late from his sister's party, and Dad still had to put the Cindy house together. And he wasn't exactly in the mood or state to put a dollhouse together. So he wrestled the house together with much swearing and annoyance, and really lost patience by the time he tried to rig the elevator together. So it never really was put together quite right. Whenever I'd try to hit the button, she'd go up or down a little ways, but the string always got jammed and the motor would make an insistent "nyarr" kind of sound. The elevator would pop off its track, and I'd have to hit the switch and try to line the rope back on the little pulleys and wheels again. But no matter, because that house was fucking awesome. I had enough furniture eventually to make it adequate. I had a dining room table with chairs, and a china cabinet with little plates, wine glasses, tiny silverware, teacups, and saucers. Amazing. One time when Mom was making pancakes, she made a couple of tiny ones that I could actually put on the little doll plates. For the living room, beside the dining room, I had a yellow couch that Aunt Cecily had crocheted and stuffed, but it wanted to roll onto its back all the time, and I had to make sure to cram it against the cardboard living room wall so it stayed propped up. On the next floor down, in the bedroom, I had the bed, but I never had the little bedside table with the battery-powered little lamp that actually lit up. Damn, but I wanted that little lamp. On the main floor, I had a fridge and a stove. The fridge came with a little plastic turkey, a head of lettuce, some little plastic fruits, and a little cardboard container of milk. I didn't have any furniture for the bathroom, but I did have a bathtub that actually belonged to Barbie. It was designed to be a bubble bath and had a little pump on the side, so if you added a bit of dish soap to the water and started pumping away, it would shoot enough air into the tub to foam it up. It didn't fit very well, but I crammed it in there anyway. I don't know why, but as a kid, I thought spiral staircases were so frigging amazing. Magical swirling staircases that take you from one glamorous room to the next. I also love secret rooms. One day, I am going to own a house that has a secret room. Oh, look at your bookcase! Ha! What they don't know is that part of the bookcase swirls away to reveal a secret room. Extra points if the secret door opens to a secret passage or a secret spiral stairway that leads to the secret room. Well, it's worth noting that even though the dollhouse had a spiral staircase leading up to the opulent rooftop patio terrace, most of that house was cardboard and the staircase wanted to not stay level and pop up just above the rooftop, and I'd have to keep fitting it back into its roof hole. Cardboard. One time, Brother was upstairs on his own, whipping a basketball around for whatever reason a kid thinks is a good idea to whip a ball around in the house. The basketball flew out of his hands and crashed into my Cindy house, causing the floor that held the dining room, living room furnishings to crease in the middle. Horrified, he hastily popped the floor back out into a flat-looking board and tried to set the furniture back up as close to how it had been as possible. Unaware of this, I returned later for some quality playtime. As soon as I took my doll and bopped her up and down in an imaginary walking motion, the floor folded inward and all the furniture went crashing down with it. "Damn it!" I said with much dismay. Opportunistic Brother was within earshot and immediately popped out of his room with a delighted face. With a great theatrical gasp of delighted shock, he said, "You swore! I'm telling Mom." Me, stricken, "No, please don't tell." He may have held that one over my head for a little while for leverage. Never mind that he didn't pop out to say, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." No. I didn't find out that it was his fault for quite some time. So forever after, I had to be very careful with that floor, but it would still collapse every now and then. It all balances out though, because I did get so pissed at him one time that I ripped the arm off as Mr. Spock. And on another occasion, I also took one of his action figures and tried to whip it at him, but instead of hitting Brother, it actually crashed into a model ship that had a gazillion pieces he'd slowly and meticulously glued together. Oh, And the time down the basement, Brother had my Holly Hobby by her cloth doll's wrist and whipped her around helicopter style over his head until that arm ripped right off. And then, of course, there was the matter of my dropping his Gideon Bible into the toilet by accident, which made the pages super wavy and the book unclosably fat when it finally dried out. And years later, he dropped my 1990s bottle of Calvin Klein perfume into the toilet tank as he lifted off the lid to reattach the chain to the toilet handle. The perfume bubbled out and was mostly replaced by toilet tank water. The bathroom reeked of eternity when I discovered that. So, I'm not sure if we're even, but I feel like we're even. So that dollhouse to me was one of the most exciting presents ever. There are others that stand out from my youth, like that first little bottle of young girl perfume, or my first makeup kit when I was 13. That was also a Christmas Eve at Grandma's present. Thrilling. On Christmas Day, I went straight for the ultra-pigmented, ultramarine blue shade, and amateurishly packed that onto my eyelids. No doubt, because it was the 80s, I loaded some pink eyeshadow above the blue right up to the eyebrows. That blue color was vivid and opaque. When we arrived for Christmas dinner at Grandma's, my uncle dryly remarked, "I see you're wearing your Christmas present." I was a little perplexed by this at that time and just kind of agreed that, yeah, I sure was. I find that casual little statement hilarious now because I'm certain I walked in with, "Holy shit, makeup face." Speaking of makeup, years before I was old enough to get the real deal, at one of the firemen's staff and family Christmas parties, I got a glamour kit that I could not wait to get home and rip the plastic cover off. It came with a little plastic hand mirror, a brush, comb, little clip-on earrings, and best of all, a little red lipstick. Oh my God. I could not wait to get that thing home, rip it open, and get my hot little hands on that lipstick. Just imagine the disappointment when I tore into that thing and found that the lipstick was not a real lipstick, but was in fact just a little plastic pretend lipstick. It didn't matter that I was probably like 4. I thought I was getting a real damn lipstick, and I was all for it. As well, the mirror was just a shiny, reflective sticker that gave a fuzzy, warped reflection, and the little clip-on earrings were painful, pinchy torture. So, I waited for glamour, which came a few years later at Christmas time, in a kit that allowed you to make your own makeup. I think it was called Fresh and Fancy. You actually got to mix and blend up your own little pots of lipstick, eyeshadow, and blush. So good. I remember working away to craft up my own custom makeup with focused delight. I then loaded my face up, full glam circus style, and then agreed to put on all my snow gear with Brother to head over across the street to the Crescent in the new subdivision. The snowplow had been through and had pushed the snow on their street into a small but fantastic hill surrounding the central lamppost. I think about this often. Me loading my face up with my own handmade makeup, then trekking off to slide down the snow hill for a while. There's an interesting dichotomy between being a kid and on the verge of not being a kid for much longer. We ate many Christmas dinners at Mom's parents'. Grandma and Grandpa came from Poland, in case you missed that. I wish I had more stories from Grandma's youth, but she would talk about it very little, so I only have precious bits and scraps about her life, and even less about Grandpa. When Grandma was a young girl in Poland, one of her jobs was to keep an eye on the geese her family owned. She didn't enjoy it very much, and because animals were like tedious work to her, she didn't really get why people would have pets for the sake of having pets. When she was 18, a day arrived when she was forced to leave her home by the Nazis to work on a farm in Germany. Grandma said she had a boyfriend in Poland who she never saw again. It sounds like she had a better life on that German family's farm than she did at her own family home. The German family was very nice to her and even bought her a bicycle. It was at a displaced persons camp that Grandma met Grandpa. Grandma told a story one time that she asked Grandpa if he could watch their baby son for just a little while, for her to hike down to the river nearby to do some laundry. He responded by hitting her with the wash bucket. She in turn was so furious that she grabbed the heavy box of laundry soap and smashed him with it and told him that he would never hit her again. And he never did. Mom had told me now and again that she never knew much about her father's parents except that Grandpa's family was very mean. Grandma and Grandpa were unable to return to post-war Poland and were given the choice of emigrating to Australia or to Canada. They chose Canada, where Grandpa would have a job working in the gold mines of northern Ontario. Grandma said the trip was long, and as they were traveling by train through the stark Ontario wilderness, she was filled with dismay and fretted over their choice as she surveyed desolate Red Lake, Ontario. What would it have been like to be in this new place? I imagine Grandma probably had to make most of the clothes for my aunt and uncle. What was it like trying to make dinner? What did their accommodations look like? What happened to the friends they made there? These are things I knew nothing about when I was little. I only knew that my maternal grandparents were Polish, and for whatever reason, I took great pride in this. It meant to me that they spoke another very interesting and mysterious language. Sometimes when I'd be visiting in early years being that distinct period of time before Sister was born, Grandma would be speaking entirely in Polish, and Mom would answer in a mix of Polish and English. Polish grandparents also meant that I got to eat some very exciting food that many of my childhood friends didn't get to experience, and this really showed itself at our Christmas dinner table. In addition to the traditional turkey, stuffing, and mashed potatoes, we also had Grandma's own secret recipe pierogi, pickled and sautéed mushrooms, kapusta. Grandma's was a cooked sauerkraut dish with mushrooms, onions, and slices of kielbasa, and what I knew as meat on a stick. They were the most delicious roasted pork kebabs. Grandma's own recipe pierogi and her braided, fried, long-cooked meat on a stick were the stars of the meal, and both take a great deal of time to make. I make both at Christmas dinner now that Mom and Grandma are gone, and let me tell you, it's a good thing they're extremely popular because they're a hell of a lot of work. Grandma also used to make a meat stuffing that I thought was so delicious. It was a soft, savory casserole made with ground beef and bread soaked in milk. I've never made it myself, but boy, did I ever love it when Grandma made it. I also used to like her salad a lot. It was just a crisp iceberg lettuce and cucumber salad with a peppery white vinegar dressing that I can't seem to replicate. The turkey, though? The turkey was not the star of the show at Grandma's house. She had classic poultry paranoia, and that turkey was cooked. Dry is a bit of an understatement. Sorry, Grandma. Sawdust is probably closer to it. And finally, for dessert, Grandma always made what we called Jell-O cake, and you might know as stained glass or broken glass cake. It was a hit with everyone. When Mom and her oldest sister did Christmas dinners, dessert would be plum pudding and trifle. The plum pudding was a recipe from Nanny, and all we knew is that Dad said the recipe was old. I always appreciated the fusion of Polish and English. Christmas Day had more of a seriousness to it than Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve was all zeal and fervor and electric anticipation, and Christmas Day seemed more inherently reverent. We opened our presents early in the morning. I feel like I might be the only kid that felt like Christmas could wait a couple more hours, and a little sleeping in wouldn't hurt anyone. But my siblings and Mom were always awake very early. After presents, we'd have the fancy breakfast Mom would make for us. Then, up until my little sister was about 3, we would have to pack all the damn fun up and head off to church. Dad and his family growing up really weren't big churchgoers, but Dad went along with it because of Mom. Mom tried to go through the motions, but it didn't last very many years. So we went to church on Christmas and Easter, and that was about it. I know it sounds terrible, but as a kid, when I had to stop, drop, and tidy up all my shiny new Christmas toys and leave for church, I thought that sucked big time. Brother and I generally had a hard time not goofing off a bit in church, and not having any super inappropriate laughter. For one thing, the priest would sing parts of the sermon. We'd take one look at each other and start snickering and trying not to snicker, And it just became that kind of funny where you were dying as you tried so hard to be respectful. Mom was not amused. Then there came the part of the service I dreaded, the part where you were supposed to offer some fellowship to your neighbors. This is where suddenly those people in front of you, in their crisp polyester blazers and tweedy suit jackets, horrifyingly turned around, looked right at you, and you had to shake their hands and mutter, "Peace be with you." Totally unsettling, touching those lotion-perfumed, unfamiliar lady hands and equally foreign man hands, and stammering, "Peace be with you," echoing them, and you didn't really know what it meant. The most exciting church expedition was when Sister was 3, and it was Mom's year to cook Christmas dinner. Mom insisted that we had to go, and Dad had to take us. Dad let Sister bring her new Christmas Western Barbie doll. Sister was playing with Barbie during the service, and at one point when we were all supposed to be standing, dropped Barbie's cowboy boot on the pew in front of us. When it came time for the donation basket to be passed around, Dad gave Sister the coins and let her hold on to them to put in the basket. She dropped them before the basket had arrived to our row, and in the silence, I listened as the coins dropped, rolled straight over to the floor furnace grate, dropped in, and ching, 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 as they fell through. When it came time for communion, and as people began lining up, Dad obliviously said, "They're done here, right? Let's go." And we left. Mom was mortified when she found out we dipped out during communion. Once church was finished, if it wasn't Mom's year to cook Christmas dinner, we could enjoy our new toys all afternoon until it came time to get dressed up to go to Grandma's or my aunt's. If it was Mom's year to make dinner, she'd flip out on all of us about cleaning up the mess. Then we could go play with our new toys after that. Maybe I would have some pretty, new, slightly stiff clothes to wear for Christmas dinner. In the early years, there were a few times when Dad, as a fireman, had to work. One year, he finished work and showed up just in time for dinner to Grandma's. I remember how happy I felt when the door opened and he shouted, "Hello!" He came in wearing his 1970s double-breasted brown suit and his very stylish two-tone bubble-toed shoes. Unfortunately, those shoes had no tread on the bottom, and the floor at Grandma's side door entryway was slick with the melted snow everyone had tracked in. Also unfortunate in this case was that the side door opened straight down into the basement. Dad came in, had barely shouted a happy "Merry Christmas!" hit that slippery tile with his slick new shoes, and shot straight down the basement stairs like a human toboggan. Luckily, there are only about 5 stairs down to the basement, but it didn't feel too good just the same. Mom immediately started laughing, and Grandma was immediately furious that their house had injured Dad. I raced down the first few stairs to the landing, alarmed and crying, to see Dad splayed out on the basement floor, groaning. "Are you all right, Daddy?" I wailed. "Ooh, I'm all right, honey." That quick trip to the basement dented the bumped-out toe of one of those flashy disco shoes. Dad had also remarked that one time he tried to put out a friend's cigarette on the ground while wearing those shoes, and the cigarette actually stuck to and started to melt the sole. In later years, when my siblings and I were teens and young adults, and Grandma lived on her own, she wasn't as interested in making Christmas dinner any longer. I liked Christmas dinner at Grandma's. I liked everyone sitting around the same table. At Mom's and my aunt's, it kind of evolved into more of a buffet type, fill your plate and find anywhere to sit kind of thing. Regardless, it was always loud and slightly chaotic at Christmas dinner, with a very steamy kitchen and some fairly grouchy, burnt-out women cooks. Grandma was so sick of the whole business of preparing the food that by the time it was time to eat, she wasn't even interested, but instead would patrol around with an angry look on her face, seeing who was eating enough. I can clearly picture her saying to me, "Kidden, you don't eat much," meaning that even though I was maybe 5, I wasn't doing my part to stuff myself until I was completely ill. Sometimes Grandma would even go sit at the top of the stairs leading to the basement, and Mom would call out annoyed, "Mom, come eat something!" Grandma would wave this away with annoyance and a look of complete and utter disgust and strongly affirm, "I don't want a nothing!" One time during the very serious post-dinner plate scraping and dishwashing, when I was a teen and Sister was a kid, Sister and I watched in silent, jaw-dropping horror as Grandma squeegeed the uneaten food off the plates into the garbage with her bare hand. We were delicate back then and thought this no-nonsense approach was so damn gross. But I swear we could do it ourselves now. Maybe.